Hello everyone, this is RC0538. I'm bringing you a Soviet armor deck. I jokingly called this my T64 deck because I have a lot of T64 lines in here. Or T64 units. Basically, 1, 2, 3, 4, of my cards are dedicated to T64s. Well, I guess about, 5 of them are dedicated to non-T64s, but, the emphasis was placed on using my T64s as a workhorse tank instead of trying the T72. But let's dive into the rest of the deck before going to the armor section. First, we have an FOB. Pretty standard, the only building you can employ, and it has a bunch of supplies. To get the supplies to the front, I have the MI6. I don't usually use this, but in this case, as an armor deck, it's important that I'm able to get resupplies to an area quickly, and with 300 kilometers an hour speed, you can do that. And the only problem with it is that it's a big chopper, so please keep it away from the front lines, or else I will, if I'm on the other side, engage it with mortars, because 75 points and the chance to destroy 3,700 liters of enemy supplies is an opportunity that I am not going to, let go to waste. And then, as just a logistics truck, I have the Earl 4320. This is just a pretty standard supply truck at 20 points, has 1,100 liters of supply. If you find that 9 supply trucks is enough for you and you want some more, you could get 11 of them with the Earl 375D. Both work. It's just your preference. This one, of course, carries 300 liters less supplies, so you ultimately do have less supplies in the deck, so I mean, I guess, that's kind of the way to approach that, if you will. And if you're looking for something very numerous, and also it's going to be able to, stay at the same pace as your tanks, you could make the case for the MTLB, which is amphibious. This is an interesting unit. It's also armored, and it's not a bad choice. It's just that it doesn't carry a lot of supplies. I can only imagine being the driver and literally strapping gas cans and ammunition on the top of this thing, because I would think just one shot and you're done. I would really hate to be that guy. And then, as a, of course, as a command unit, I've just got the UAZ 469U. Now, the UAZ, or the UAZ, whatever it's called, however you want to pronounce it, it has a good speed at 70 kilometers an hour, so you're going to be able to be, be out of danger if it does become in danger. But it really shouldn't. If it's ever in danger, then you're probably using this unit wrong. This is best as, I guess you can say, an auxiliary, command unit just capturing zones for cheaps. It's not going to really hold its own in a fight. I wouldn't recommend really any of these, units, though. The BMP-1K I can maybe recommend the most, but it doesn't have the most armor on it. The T-72K1 is probably what I'd recommend for the command tank, because the weaponry doesn't have to be stellar, but it does maintain a good armor on it, and it's, fast enough that it works. But I cannot recommend the T-80UK. I just can't, because there's no reason to use this unit, in my opinion. Its armor is excessive, its price is excessive, and its weaponry is the same as a 150-point unit or so. Stay away from this, please. Please do. Now, moving on to the infantry section, I had actually intended to take a different unit when I brought this, but it's worked out just fine, actually. This is the Motor 90, pretty lackluster stats, for infantry, other than their RPG, which I'll get to. They have just an AK-74 and a PKM, standard assault rifle, and light machine gun, very similar to the M60, the PKM, and the AK-47 is just, or 74, excuse me, is very similar to basically every other rifle in the game. So nothing special here, but the RPG-7 VR, I should say, is great because it has a 24 armor penetration. The only problem is that it only has a 525 meter range. If you'd want some more range and a cheaper unit, you maintain the same primary weapon, infantry weaponry, other than you get an inferior RPG. And so, you lose 10 points of armor penetration. For me, upgrading to the Motor 90 definitely makes that worth it. Getting this extra suppression boost, penetration boost, and accuracy boost, but you do lose, about, 175 meters in range. So that's definitely an issue. But moving on to the transport, I was going for the BMP-1D. The reason I wanted the BMP-1D was, of course, it had a grenade launcher and it had the GROM. This means that it's a very potent anti-infantry unit and is great for supporting my force. Instead, I'm like, oh, BMP-1, and I selected this probably on accident, just on accident. I just selected this unit instead. They're the same cost. The only difference is, well, I would say the only difference is they have a couple of differences. The BMP-1P is faster, but has less armor, and it's also amphibious. The BMP-1D is not amphibious, but it has more armor. But the biggest difference is their armament. The BMP-1P has a concourse missile on it, while the BMP-1D has a grenade launcher. I'm sticking with the BMP-1P right now because I've found that the concourse can work, and because it can work, and I've seen it work, I am sticking with this one. It really saved my butt a couple times in the gameplay I used with this deck. But, you know, that's just how it worked for me. If you wanted something really, really good at its job, like when it comes to the expense, you know, it's just 5 points more, but, you know, that really is looking at a lot more. So you might want to downgrade maybe to the just the normal Motostrelki, and you're going to be paying the same amount. But you also get, I believe, a bit less availability. So, you know, that's something to watch. But you do get the Concourse M and an autocannon while still maintaining, well, getting a faster speed, actually. Maintaining the amphibious capability and getting more armor. So this could really be a good choice on the BMP-2 anyways. But I'm sticking with the BMP-1P because I don't need something really expensive, and this works out just fine for me. Next, I have the Sapper 85. These are basically just discount Spetsnaz, is what I think of them as. They're primary, their AK-74 is inferior to the AS-Val in a number of ways, other than that it has a longer range, but it doesn't have the same rate of fire, so that's why it's not as good. But they do get the RPO Rice, which is, of course, what the Spetsnaz have, and you're going to be doing a lot of damage with this thing against enemy infantry. Furthermore, to back them up, I brought in basically a tank of a armored personnel carrier, and I'm pretty sure that's what it is. It's an actual tank. I think it is. Don't quote me on that. But it's an exceptionally good transport. It has an AGS-17, and it has a machine gun mounted on it. So both of those things combined makes this a very lethal transport. On top of the fact that this has 7 frontal armor, which means you're actually going to be able to take some hits from some mediocre, you know, laws like the M72, like just the normal M72, and you're going to be able to really support your infantry well with this. Moving on, I have the Igla N. These guys are great because you can really hide them in front of your tanks, or at least, you know, right beside your tanks. And so as soon as, you know, you see an enemy helicopter, you can reverse your tank. You know, they might get cocky because they don't think you have a lot of AA. Surprise, Igla N comes out and blows the helicopter up. So you can do some nice stuff with it. Even though it's maybe not the most accurate at only 55%, but that's good enough for me. Especially when you get a 24 or 50 meter range out of it. Now, moving on, MTLBV is just a standard track transport with a, you know, machine gun on it. Nothing special here. What is special are these guys. These are, once again, Motostrelki 90s. Not going to go over them again. But the transport that I'm bringing them in, you know, I'm really just bringing these guys in for the BMP-3, because this is a great unit. It has the Arcan missile, which is exceptionally gifted. With a 2,800 meter range, it ensures that you're going to be able to engage far beyond the range of basically, you know, most other, you know, ground units, if not all. You have 50% accuracy, which is great, which is only improved when you take, since I'm taking it at a higher veterancy. It can fire this on the move, which is also impressive, so you don't lose, you know, you lose accuracy, but it won't just automatically miss, which is great. It's a fast missile. You just kind of see that in game. It doesn't really have a speed listed on it, on the missile anyways. 21 AP power could be better. That's kind of my only grief with the missile, is that it doesn't have like 26 armor penetration. But you know what? With everything else being so good, I can live with this lower armor penetration, and you can really use it to just engage enemy forces from, you know, beyond your tank's range, and just cause, you know, a lot of havoc and damage to some of the supporting vehicles, maybe, that might be around the bigger fish, if you will. And then you also have decent suppression for an ATGM, like, comparing that, you know, it's basically the same, I guess. But then you also have good reload time. They also have a main gun that's only HE. It's this long barreled, right here. Also, I believe where the ATGM is fired from. But yeah, the main gun on it is kind of lackluster. Only 3 HE power, but the great thing about it is that it has a range that exceeds tanks. That doesn't mean this will engage tanks. It just means that you can knock out infantry from a pretty good range. It's really only anti-vehicle defense is this 2A72 autocannon. It's a good autocannon with 1750 meter range, 3 armor penetration, and 40% accuracy, but it's really the only thing that you can do to engage, tanks once your ATGMs are out. It's kind of an issue, in my opinion. But that's infantry summed up. Support, I've brought in the Tungushkas. Tungushkas are great anti-helicopter units. You can really stop a helicopter rush in their tracks with this thing. Great, accuracy, great range. If they do have their guns turned off, though, a good way to counter these is by using an anti-ground missile plane. Tank snipers, basically. And they're pretty expensive, so if you knock a couple of these out, you're taking away a significant portion of the enemy's AA. So definitely you can use that to your advantage. But great range against helicopters, so it's a great unit to have against enemy helicopters, which is basically going to be most likely the enemy's response to your tank push. Is bringing in some helicopters. I'm thinking longbows, Lynx 3s, and, all that stuff. Nasty stuff you don't want to engage in your tanks. But using, say, a couple of these surface-to-air missiles, you can effectively lock down the airspace against helicopters and just keep the gun off unless, if there's, unless you have to turn it on to shoot down a plane or something when there's no seed in the air. You can do a lot of damage with the Tungushka. Tungushka M. Tungushka here is basically just an inferior version of that. I brought it because it's cheaper. I'll get more of them, but, their missile is inferior. But that's really the only big change. Then, as something I can scatter about, I have the Strela 10M. These are pretty decent units. They miss a bit often, in my opinion, but they do a decent enough job. And so, for that reason, I do find the Strela 10M to be a pretty good, surface-to-air missile that you can use in most situations. And finally, for our long-range anti-aircraft solution, we have the Buck M1, and this thing, well, it's going to shoot enemy aircraft right out of the sky with a 4,550 meter range and very high accuracy with very good HE power. You can do a ton of damage to enemy aircraft, and then, stun them, panic them with this, and then, light them up with a Tungushka or something. So, but just make sure that since all of these have radar weaponry on them, make sure to turn it off until it's needed. Then we have the MSTA, well, the 2519. This is great heavy artillery. I was kind of just experimenting with putting the heavy artillery in my tank section in case there was, I don't know, like some, ATGM team holding me up, or I wanted to stun enemy tanks, and it can work out. The problem is that laying down smoke screens is a bit more difficult because it's not able to do it as fast as a mortar can, and the enemy can kind of see that coming a mile away instead of it being kind of a surprise thing. So, definitely an issue here with this. But, you can get some good kills, you can do some counter battery with it, so that's nice. Tank-wise, March of the Super Heavies, if you will. We have 2 T72BUs, well, T90s, but T72BU is their prototype name. They're great tanks, they have great guns, good ATGMs, and their machine gun is okay. Their armor is also quite good, with 22 frontal armor being basically the max for most heavy tanks. And 10 side armor means that you're going to be able to take a hit or two and keep on rolling, but I wouldn't recommend letting this thing, stay exposed for too long, because if I'm the enemy, I'm going to make this a priority target because it is such an important, unit in the enemy's war machine. Then I have the T80UM. Now, the T80UM has the Invar, which has 24 armor penetration, and it can engage with good accuracy at range. This makes it a very effective support unit for my T72BUs. because while it can't take as many hits because it only has 20 frontal armor, it can dish out a bit more damage against enemy super heavies. So, you know, T80UM definitely has a place, but it's not necessarily being directly on the front lines. Then I have the T80U. If we were to compare this with the T80UK, you'll find that these are basically the exact same unit. In fact, they are the exact same unit, other than that the T80UK can capture things for another 50 points. So, you know, I just don't find that to be worth it. But the T80U does maintain good weaponry. Has 20 armor penetration, which is okay. It's pretty good, actually. Has good accuracy with 60%. Actually, quite good accuracy. And it won't automatically miss just because it moves, because it is semi-active. And so you can fire it. You won't fire another one until the missile hits or misses. But you can use the stabilizer, you know, on that if you have to attack while on the move. Then we also have the T64 BV. The BV is pretty similar, just comparing these units, other than that it has much less armor, but its ATGM is kind of a mixed bag. It's better. Its ATGM is better because it has better accuracy and stabilizer, but it has a shorter range, so you could say the accuracy and stabilizer will kind of make up because of the, you know, range gap being closed. So, you know, there's that to be said. But for a 120 point unit, I really like the T64 BV. At least after trying it out. It does a great job. It looks really cool, in my opinion, for a main battle tank. Also, fun little fact, these two, like, little, I always kind of thought these were, like, I guess you could say, like, sleeping bags or tents or other supplies, maybe oil. It's not. In fact, it's a snorkel, so the tank can drive in the water, which is kind of cool. Just a fun little fact about the T64, but it's a great tank, especially in a workhorse role. This thing stood up to challengers, and yeah, that definitely gave it a nice reputation in my book. Because if you can stand up to challengers, you can stand up to quite a number of enemy tanks. I didn't spring for the T64 BV1, mostly because it had less armor penetration, and it didn't have that great Agana ATGM. Other than that, though, they're very similar tanks. Other than that, you get, a few more. You get 7 instead of 6. But, you know, for me, the upgrade is worth it. Meanwhile, instead, I took the T64 BM. I get 9 of these. They have great accuracy with 55%, and their armor penetration is close. And they have the inferior version of the Agana. They have the Cobra, which is fair. It's fair. Its accuracy isn't all that good, but remember, I'm taking these at veterans, so they're going to be doing a lot of, damage with their high accuracy. Then I have the T62 MV. This is more of a support tank, if you will. It's more so a defensive role. Putting this on the attack is basically suicide, because its Arcan isn't stabilized, its gun is barely stabilized, its accuracy is poor, and yeah, not a lot of reason to take this. This accuracy I thought used to be better, at least when it was sitting still. Maybe it was like 50 or 60, but now they changed it. So this unit really isn't the best, but I decided to try it out and use it solely as a defensive tank, and it can kind of fulfill that role. Notice I say kind of. So I'm kind of considering changing this out, but it worked, kind of. And then I have the T64A. It has only a 2100 meter range, making it the only tank in, my entire armor deck that has a 2100 meter range. And its biggest role is mostly just as, I guess you could say, a filler tank. A tank I can use when I need tanks. Just a gun deployed to the battlefield rapidly. That's how I kind of view the T64A. It's armored, so, that's kind of the role it fills. So, yeah. Moving on to Recon, a valuable part of any armor deck, because, well, you need to be able to see what you're shooting at. For that, I have Razvedkas and the Mi-24D for rapid deployment. I also have Razvedkas, which, by the way, these aren't really good offensive units by any means. They're not Rangers or, Spetsnaz GRU. These guys are just cheap, spammable recon infantry. Think of them like cavalry scouts, but better because they don't have that crappy Dragon ATGM, which gives its position away. these guys do pretty decently. I do, like them as Vedka. They're cheap, and I can deploy them with relative ease, and if I lose them, I'm not losing a major investment. And then, just, to bring them in for the ground, I have them in the Earl, which just makes them cheaper and, more, kind of rapidly, be able to rapidly deploy. It's faster than, the MTOBV will get there. And so, there's kind of a place for them. And then, for an armored, I guess you could say recon, I brought the T55. And this thing, don't be fooled by its poor stats. This thing can do some real damage if the enemy ignores it. Mostly because it has medium stealth, so it's going to be hard to detect. And if the enemy is close enough, I've seen this thing get side shots and kill challengers. I know I say that, but I've actually had it happen. So, it's worth noting that this unit can be lethal when used properly. It's a great recon tank. You can use it in a great role, such as that. So, yeah. Mostly a lackluster tank, but it's good also because it kind of camouflages itself. And if the enemy just sees a T55, I'm not going to give that a priority engagement. I'm going to be like, oh, that's a T55A. I really don't care about that. And then all of a sudden, it's spotting all my units. So it's kind of a, recon unit in disguise, if you will. That's kind of how I think about it. And then, last but not least, we have the, I guess it is the least, because you get the least amount of them. But you have the BRM-1K. The BRM-1K has a terrible gun. Turn off the gun, it's just going to give away its location, and it's not going to do, any damage for the most part. It's better to just keep it hidden and keep it spotting, because if this thing takes fire, it's not going to last very long. It only has 2 frontal armor, so it's not going to be the most robust and survivable unit, but it definitely can work. It has exceptional optics, and it's the only exceptional optics vehicle that we have access to, or, exceptional optics recon unit that we have access to, so, it's important to have that in order to be able to get the max spotting distance for my tanks. So that's why this is bringing in. And once again, it's kind of that recon unit in disguise, but, it's not really capable of fighting or defending itself like a T55 might be able to. Moving on to the vehicles, first we have the BMPT. This is an exceptional anti-infantry unit, and it's definitely necessary in a Russian armor deck, in any Russian deck that you can get this thing in, for that matter, because it's an exceptional anti-infantry unit, just so good at its job. It's got an AGS-17, main gun and an autocannon, great use in forests. It can cover open terrain. It can kind of work in towns or on the outskirts. Wouldn't recommend that, but in forests and, on the outskirts of forests. Great tank and infantry support for this thing is. So yeah, BMPT is a great, fire support vehicle. Yeah, that's what it is. Also good speed, has medium optics, so in a pinch you can spot. I really like the BMPT. I also have the Norov in here, really weird unit, I know, but I'm bringing it in because of its high rate of fire, and sometimes having that high fire rate is valuable for suppressing infantry out in the open, or just killing vehicles, because if I'm just bringing in some really nice tanks, which I wouldn't recommend, but Norov makes good support, for just killing off vehicles. And it can really just pin down an enemy group, even though it doesn't have the best armor penetration or stats, your tanks can deal with that. The Norov is just there to keep the enemy off of you. And then, of course, we have our nice little flame tank. These flame tanks are great for just forcing the enemy out of buildings and on the outskirts, allowing your units to get in, panicking enemy units that are on the outskirts. Aw, napalm is glorious. You can also set, forests ablaze, just burn it, because, yeah, just flush the enemy out. So, TO-55 does a good job of that. You could make a case for the T62, but it's slower, and so I wanted something that was more capable of keeping up with my main force. I also have helicopters in this deck, and they're very useful for getting around and firing on the flanks of enemy tanks while your tanks are engaging, saying, if your tanks and the enemy tanks are engaging, use an Mi-24 VP and try to get some side shots. And it works out very well, because these VPs are hyper lethal, believe it or not. They're 100-point helicopters, so I guess I would hope that they're lethal, but they are exceptionally gifted at dealing with the enemy tanks and such. They're great units, can't recommend them highly enough. Their autocannon is great for engaging transports and really in just light vehicles. Using it on infantry, not to say it's a waste, but you don't get a lot of ammo for it at only 450 rounds, and you're going to be firing that basically at 10 times the speed, so that's, not too great. You're not going to be, well, not 10 times the speed. You're firing it at significantly faster rates, let's put it that way. So you're like 3 times as fast. I exaggerated, quite a bit there, but you're firing at like 3 times the speed, so you kind of got to cut it back a little bit on the on the autocannon, just manage it properly. Its rocket pods are great for suppressing enemy infantry and vehicle groups. That's really kind of how I use rocket pods. And then I have Kokons, which these Kokons have a 2,800 meter range, which is great. You can really just, if the enemy's AA vehicles are a bit back, you can snipe the tank. And that's not always likely, because as soon as they see you, they'll probably move that, AA vehicle forward. But Mi-24 VP is great at dealing with enemy AA and tanks. Well, not AA, that's great at dealing with tanks. And AA with short range, how about we put it that way. And then just as a cheaper gunship that I can deploy in a versatile, variety of situations at a cheaper cost. It's not too much cheaper, but it is a cheaper cost. So I bring in the Mi-24P. Just using this to really, bring home that, role of support. The Mi-24 VPs are great in specialist roles. You bring these out when you need a job done and it's dangerous. But when you just need a helicopter support, I'd recommend a P, just an Mi-24P. It's basically the same as the Mi-24 VP, but its autocannon is not mounted in the nose, it's mounted along the side, and also it has less ATGMs. Aircraft is small. I have 2 Su-27 PUs. Just using these to shoot down, enemy aircraft. It can work, just firing off enough missiles. They'll level up fairly quickly as they get killed and survive. Just make sure that you're not losing them, because they're very expensive air superiority fighters. Then to deal with large amounts of enemy tanks, in case for some reason I can't hold out, the Su-25T is great, because, well, really for me, the role of this unit is to use its Vickers to engage things like Challenger 2s or other high priority enemy targets that, yeah, my tanks can handle them, but it's probably going to be at a bigger cost to me. So using a couple Su-25Ts, you can just wreck enemy, tank groups. And then as a backup air superiority fighter and cluster bomber, I brought in the MiG-29M. Really don't use this unit that much, and I don't see it used too much, but its clusters aren't bad. 6 AP is at the mid-level, it's pretty standard. 10 is kind of the max, but they work. They can really engage clumps of enemy units, and they do a good job at that. And then using the Vimples, you can just kind of use these on makeshift air patrol, so you could have an Su-27 PU up patrolling once, and then you could have the MiG-29, patrolling another time, and just using their Vimple missiles. And that can work. It can really work in deterring the enemy if they know it's a multi-role and has long-range missiles. Wouldn't recommend them primarily for that role, but they can definitely perform it. And the great thing is you can have them circle, shoot down a plane once they've not wasted, but use their missiles. You can have them bomb the enemy and get out of there. So, do like the MiG-29s. Anyways, that's it for this deck, guys. I jokingly called it my T64 deck. I hope you like it. I'll have the deck code in the description below, so you can use this deck for yourself. It's a pretty nice Russian armor deck, in my opinion. It may seem low on tanks, but believe me, you'll have plenty when the fighting really starts. Anyways, guys, this is RC0538 signing off. Have a good day. Let me know your thoughts on this deck down in the comments below. Have a good one.